ch21. The saloon was much more crowded than before, the noise already full-mouthed. At the entryway I looked first for that not-so-nice man, the one with the pelican feather on his coat lapel. Relieved not to see him, I went to the stage at the back of the hall, hoping the negro boy was there. When I saw he wasn't, my heart seemed to drop. The only one on the low stage was an old white man sweeping. His full gray beard was unkempt, his head bald, his mouth collapsed, his eyes bleary red. With his ragged clothing I judged him to be a failed miner. Such men were all over town. Not knowing what else to do, I stood waiting on him, but he paid no attention to me. Instead, he worked his broom in slow, ceaseless circles, now and again pausing to throw out a clogged cough. "Sir," I called at last, "can you tell me where the musicians are?" The old man paused in his work and gazed at me as though waking from a dream. "Musicians?" he asked, and coughed as if his throat were full of phlegm. I said, "There was a black boy here, a bugler. He told me his name was Sam." The old man stared at me, but not as if he were seeing. He let forth a few more coughs which shook his whole body. When he stopped, he drew his trembling hand over his mouth and wiped a gob of whatever it was he had spit up and smeared it on his trousers. "Sir," I prompted, "I need to speak to that boy." "One of the musicians?" he said, as much to himself as me. "The colored kid? Don't know much about him, save him and his father live over in Happy Valley. Used to have an older brother. Don't know what happened to him either." He coughed, spat, turned away, and resumed his slow sweeping. It had hardly been a conversation, but when he turned his back on me I knew it was over. "Thank you," I muttered, and headed for the doors, making my way through the unruly gamblers. I again looked for the man I didn't like, but caught no sight of him. Dejected, I passed through the entryway, but once outside it was clear that if I wished to speak to that bugler, I must go find him in Happy Valley. Happy Valley was a small area south of what people were calling Market Street, situated at the southern end of Yerba Buena Cove, near a place called Rincon Point. No ships came there, not even the abandoned ones. I suppose the name Happy Valley was meant as a jest because the men with whom I had worked had taken pains to tell me that there was no valley and little happiness there, that it was not a place to picnic or sniff the air. Rather, it was an area full of sludge, sewage, and gross mud, that if one desired to define the word dreadful or nasty, you might as well describe Happy Valley. Thad had spoken about it too, saying that Happy Valley was the most crowded, poorest part of the city. Crowded, he said, because people could live there without paying rent. Squatters. Most of all, it was the section of the city where discarded people and things were shunted. The people living there, he said, had had the worst kind of luck, were sick or poor. More often than not, they were a mix of all three. Once you lived there, he said, you tended to remain as if stuck in its mud. Thad also claimed that people who had committed crimes often took up residence there, since it was common knowledge that the city's new small police force refused to venture into the area. In other words, all agreed that Happy Valley was the last place I should visit. But though it might be the worst of San Francisco, if I wanted to speak to the boy Sam, that's where I had to go. So it was that not long after I left the Mercury, I stood at the unhappy neighborhood's edge, where I could see for myself much of what I had been told. The people I saw walking about appeared forsaken, nary a cheerful face, nor did I see any women or girls. As I remained there seeking the courage to go forward, I remembered Father saying when he left, "Try and act a little ladylike." No, going into Happy Valley was hardly ladylike. It might, I had been warned, even be perilous. Yet Father had also told me that I must be responsible for my brother. I couldn't have it both ways. In any case, my agitation had only grown. I had to find Jacob. Of course, there was nothing to suggest that the bugle boy, if I could even find him, knew anything more than he had already told me. But as Señor Rosales had suggested, Sam might have remembered something after I left. I therefore felt obliged to speak to him, the last to have seen Jacob, thus being the only thread I could clutch, my tiny clue as to my brother's whereabouts. Except as I stood there before Happy Valley, I didn't even know how to start looking for him. Then I heard a slow, sad weep of music, which drifted over the dilapidated dwellings clear and clean. I knew it right away, the song I'd heard the bugle boy play. I often think of riding home. I told myself that it had to be Sam. Hoping the music would continue so I could follow it to the source, I reminded myself I must be careful not to get lost. From my money belt I wiggled out my knife and kept it hidden in my hand. Only then did I step forward. You might think that trying to trace the source of the music would be easy, but there was no order to the place. Pathways were never straight. The people living there had used anything and everything that might give shelter and set it up at utter random. Tents, slapdash shacks, lopsided packing box homes, a cloth tied to 4 or 2 poles, sheets of old sailcloth used for making tents, were spread upon the ground under which people lay. As I walked, moving along the winding, pinching pathways that lay between tents, shacks, and sleeping spots, the music stopped or became soft, which meant I too had to stop and pray it might resume. Each time it halted I'd whisper, as if to that boy Samuel, "Keep playing, keep playing." As I continued on, men appeared from what seemed to be nowhere. Seeing me, they stopped, their looks poking at me, their raw gazes rude and rough, sometimes altogether alarming, as if daring me to go forward. At such moments I felt the need to retreat and find another route. Never had I been so glad I was not in young woman's dress. I kept wandering, constantly checking behind me in hopes I'd remember a way out. I was not sure I could. Fortunately, the music repeated itself over and over again. Oh, how sad it sounded! Yet oddly it gave me hope. At length the music guided me to a tent made of blue cloth, square and somewhat larger than ours. It was wedged between other tents, so that there was not much space around it. With my knife concealed in hand, I stood and listened to the music. Though relieved I'd found where I thought the boy Samuel lived, I dithered, reminding myself that he might not know anything more about Jacob. Nor had he been friendly. I had no idea what he, a colored boy, might think of me, a white girl. He might resent my coming. I further admit, by then I was already wondering how I was ever going to find my way out of Happy Valley. Telling myself I had come this far, that I had to at least try to speak to the boy, I put my knife away, stood before the tent opening, and called, "Samuel Nichols! Samuel! Sam!" Instantly the music stopped.